who were the biggest winners and losers from the Baltimore Ravens 2023 mandatory minicamp. We talk about that and what it could mean for their status on the roster and what they have to do during training camp. All that and more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with us on Tuesday, Taco Tuesday, June 20th. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every day as well. We're free and available all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to us for free. No money involved, both video and audio form. We're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast. So any news analysis updates, we're here for you 5 days a week. And you can find us anywhere you get your shows. And here today, we have a lot to dive into. Is, again, kind of in the lull period. That's my favorite saying. I say it at the beginning of every show now because it is now. The minicamp is over. We're waiting for training camp to begin. So I want to kind of put a bow, kind of wrap up minicamp today. We talked about the Ravens on yesterday's show and kind of looked at a 53-man roster prediction. I should have honestly flipped the episodes. I should have done yesterday's show today and today's show yesterday. But it doesn't matter. We're going to do both shows, and that's what counts. So today we're going to be talking about the biggest minicamp winners and losers and talking about who gained a lot of ground, maybe gained ground for a roster spot, a starting spot. And then we'll go to the other side and talk about losers. So guys who maybe lost some ground and have to maybe make it up in training camp or something along those lines. Then we'll talk about the clutch factor for the Ravens a little bit. Justin Tucker in that conversation, Lamar Jackson. We'll look at the Ravens record in one-score games last year, kind of go through, because it didn't feel like in circumstances the Ravens were a clutch team last year. It didn't feel like they were winning a ton of one-score games. So we'll talk about that in the final segment and how they could improve on that in this year, 2023. So let's dive into the content here today. We'll start off with some winners, some mini camp, and, Jess Rubick at The Athletic, Jonas Schaefer of Baltimore Banner. They do great work over at their respective outlets. And I feel like they really are plugged in with the team. And there are a lot of people plugged in with the team, obviously, but those guys put out articles about who they thought, risers and fallers, guys who impressed during minicamp. And so using some of their insights, I also put a list out of winners that I thought were, pretty good throughout minicamp based off of everything we saw and heard. And then also some guys who lost ground. So we'll be doing some insight here and then also comparing that to what guys like Jeff and Jonas had to say. So I think one of the biggest winners of minicamp was definitely Nelson Aguilar based off of everything we heard, was catching long touchdowns. Seemed like he was in the Ravens highlight videos every single time. He's someone who I think gained a lot of ground for himself. I think there were some people who weren't really sold on Nelson Aguilar even making the team. Look, they gave him a decent contract. I think, what is it, up to $6 million or something? Along the lines, I think, of what they gave Rock Ya-Sin, actually. But he's somebody who, those five, Bateman, Beckham, Zay Flowers, Devin Duvernay, Nelson Aguilar, those five to me were locks already. But now the competition for Aguilar is it going to be for the fourth spot or the fifth spot? I think right now Aguilar does have the advantage. He gained a lot of ground through minicamp here in someone who was one of the best performers throughout the 3 days, even going back to voluntary OTA, someone who was making plays there. So he definitely was a big winner. Another guy who I think was a big winner is Malisalamove Laulu, the Ravens guard, their rookie guard, and I'll say offensive lineman. And he's someone who I think has the inside-outside versatility. Baltimore gave him a shot, though, at left guard. And I think a lot of people, when you're talking about, left guard, Ben Cleveland, right? That's somebody who's, going to win that job, the early front runner. Sure, I think he was the early front runner, but now it's really a toss-up. I think Cleveland, and we'll talk about this in the second part of the show, didn't really help himself in minicamp. So I think that Saleh gave himself a real shot. The Ravens gave him first team reps. And, Jess Rubick said it's not easy to dismiss. So the Ravens giving him first team reps. So between Cleveland and Saleh and Daniel Falele and all those guys, there's going to be a real competition. John Simpson as well at that left guard position. Someone else, and Jess Rubeck made this point, I thought it was super interesting, but he had Justice Hill as one of his biggest risers of minicamp, and his point was J.K. Dobbins didn't participate in minicamp. Gus Edwards was doing individual drills, and Justice Hill is someone that Jeff said has been one of the Ravens, or has become one of the Ravens, favorite players. Someone, his grit, his energy, someone who's a high effort guy. And we know the Ravens love those high effort guys. Now it's interesting because Justice Hill is someone who I did not have on the roster last year. He impressed me during training camp, impressed me during the preseason, made a name for himself, proved me wrong, which I was very happy he did. I want all these guys to prove me wrong. That, I say, oh, this guy doesn't have a shot. I want them to prove me wrong in that situation. Justice Hill certainly did. Ben Powell's another one who did that for me. But Justice Hill is someone who has explosiveness. I think we saw that from him as a runner last year. And Jeff saying, he caught passes out of the backfield when he was doing special teams work. He was one of the first guys to make plays and be in line for that. So Justice Hill's someone who just he screams Raven, someone who is a high effort player for sure, and I think definitely made up some ground for him. Now, I don't think it was any question that Hill was going to make the team. The Ravens re-signed him to a 2-year deal, so I think his spot was pretty safe. But look, if this Dobbins potential holding, if that's what it is, if that extends into training camp, into the regular season, etc., Justice Hill going to get some snaps. Gus Edwards, if he's not on track, Justice Hill going to get some snaps. So as a third running back, Justice Hill to me, I think is a really good option for them. Another guy, I think Isaiah Likely, someone who was a winner, made some plays throughout the course of minicamp. Isaiah Likely, I think, was a winner of the offseason for Baltimore because I think Todd Monken's going to be able to utilize him in a huge way. Now, we saw the flashes, especially when Mark Andrews was out and wasn't playing. Likely showed that he can take on a workload in this offense. Now, it's going to be different. The passing offense isn't going to necessarily run through the tight ends anymore. That doesn't mean Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews, Charlie Kolar aren't going to get, snaps. I think Charlie Kolar was another big winner here, made some plays, showed some flashes. The Ravens have a really good tight end group. Obviously, Mark Andrews is the guy that everybody knows, but Likely and Kolar is your two guys. That is your second and third options. I definitely like that a lot. Two other guys, I think this is big news for me. I like this, is David Ojabo and Odafe Owe. Ojabo is someone who, had a very strong minicamp by all accounts. Seems like their work with Chuck Smith has paid off. Their work on their own has paid off as well. Those are two guys who have a bond together and are really looking to come into their own together. Owe had a up and down rookie season, but struggled a second year. Ojabo didn't really play during his rookie year. Had one tackle, which was a sack on Joe Burrow. But to me, those two guys are so important. We talked about that on a show a couple of weeks ago about how those two really could make or break this Ravens defense. And it's good to see they're already off to a really good start here over the course of both voluntary OTAs and minicamp. Also, Ben Mason was getting a lot of love. Now, where is Mason's role? Where's a roster spot for him? Maybe if the Ravens decide to, I don't know, would it shock the world? But if they decide to shock the world and release Patrick Ricard, I think they would have a little bit of savings there. Ricard's going to start, or he's expected to start training camp on the PUP list. So Mason was getting some run over the course of minicamp and showed some surprise receiving ability and actually finished with more catches some days in his entire college seasons that he had, according to Jonas. So other guys who impressed, Michael Pearson, Travis Jones played well. They had flashes there. Ardarius Washington is someone, though, who I think was a really, really big winner in this whole thing. He, to me, is my pick to win that slot cornerback job. He showed a lot of flashes over the course of OTAs, over the course of minicamp, and by all accounts, is someone who his stock, if you're going stock up, his stock is through the roof right now. And he's someone who, look, I loved him as a third-round guy. If the Ravens were to take him in the third round, they get him as an undrafted free agent a couple years ago. Hasn't really had an opportunity to make a ton of plays, hasn't had a ton of snaps on the field. But I think this is an opportunity for Ardarius Washington. When I think his only competition at this point, unless the Ravens bring someone in, is Pepe Williams for that slot job. I don't think Kyle Hamilton's going to be playing a lot of that this year. I think he will play it a little, but they want to have a full-time nickel corner, and I think Ardarius Washington's going to be that, especially with what he was able to do over the course of minicamp so far for them. Also, Rock Yassin and Kyulu Kelly got some rave reviews. Yassin had a couple of really good plays and was steady throughout minicamp. and just around the ball consistently, which was really, really nice. So I think Baltimore, a lot of positives to take away from minicamp. Also, I think, if you want to talk about a coach, Jeff talked about this in his article. Todd Monken is someone who is a big winner. It seems like the players love his offense. They love the energy he brings. And that, to me, I think is a little bit of a shift from what we saw with Greg Roman. I'm not saying Roman was absolutely hated within that building by everyone, but, I think there were some tension points with some players. I think for Monken, it's very early on, but I think with Monken, the hire's been a slam dunk both on and off the field for them. So coming up in the second part of the show with winners, obviously there are losers. So we'll talk about some of the losers from minicamp who maybe lost some ground over the course of the 3 days and through voluntary OTAs as well. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And baseball season is in full swing now, and there's no better place to get in on all the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. And those Orioles, I'm telling you, hopefully there's a playoff berth in the horizon for them. They're in the wild card race right now, and they're doing good. Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, if you want to bet on those guys, Orioles futures, Orioles props, be sure to do it over at FanDuel. So don't miss your chance to snag a no sweat first with up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks, user permission. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. We just got into winners from the Ravens mandatory minicamp last week as we kind of put a bow on minicamp here today. But we're not going to be getting into the loser aspect of this whole thing and talking about who maybe lost some ground, because with winners here, again, as I always say, there are losers in this aspect too. So to me, I think one of the bigger losers by all accounts was Ben Cleveland, someone who I think definitely had his stock fall here. Now, look, came in to probably the offseason as the favorite for the left guard job, assuming Ben Powers left. Ben Powers did leave, got a huge money deal from the Denver Broncos, but it seems like this is going to go the way it did last year, the guard battle. For me, my favorite last year for that position was Terry Phillips, someone who I thought had shown enough, and I thought that, hey, you know what, he could build on that over the course of minicamp and training camp, and just didn't do it. And the Ravens didn't see enough in him to the point where they literally just cut him. They said, we don't want you back here. They wanted him back on the practice squad. The Giants scoop him up and say nope. And look, the Giants and Jets, the New York Ravens, they get a lot of Ravens players, but seems like the Ravens could be going that way with Ben Cleveland if he doesn't necessarily show enough for them. There have been a lot of reports that Cleveland just, hasn't necessarily looked his best. They gave him reps at tackle. Feels like he's in the competition for the guard spot, but he's definitely not the favorite anymore. He's someone who I think has to earn it as maybe a backup tackle. They gave him those tackle reps, so maybe that's where he has to make it. But to me, it's a fall from grace for someone who I know so many, myself included, we're so excited about. There have been questions about Cleveland's work ethic and how much he actually loves the game of football, which is super interesting. He actually, I talked about it yesterday, he actually had some of those concerns from certain people in his scouting reports coming out of college, coming out of Georgia. So it's really interesting to see just what this guard position has become, where we're talking about Saleh as a winner and then Cleveland as a loser, where, you might have thought, if Saleh struggles, it's okay. He's a rookie. Cleveland, you expect more from Cleveland at this point because he's entering his third season. You expect him to maybe have some of those, issues go away, but seems like he hasn't yet. And hopefully he's able to put it all together, because I think he'd be a big piece of their offense if he's able to perform well. But at this point, he just hasn't. Jess Rebeck also said that two losers for him were Pepe Williams and Jalen Armour-Davis. Now, those two didn't practice, and that's kind of why he put him in there. And look, availability is one of the best traits you can have. And for those guys, I talked about Darius Washington as the winner. Many others have too, Jeff Jonas, etc. You want to be available to fight for that spot. It seems like Washington made a huge step forward in his pursuit of some snaps of a position on this defense because he was available to do so. For those two guys, they weren't able to. And look, we know the Ravens corner situation going into training camp here. Outside of Marlon Humphrey and Rocky Ya-Sin, it is a very thin position. They definitely need to add one edge rusher and one corner, whether it be a slot guy, whether it be an outside guy, or just someone who can come in and give you quality snaps and maybe stabilize the room in the event of an injury. the Ravens are leaving a lot to chance in that corner room outside of those two veterans. And so we'll see. But for Armour Davis and Williams, hopefully they're able to get back on the field for training camp and fight for their spots on this defense. And another guy who was outlined as a loser, Tyler Huntley. Jeff said that, struggled, throughout the course of minicamp. The ball was in harm's way a little too much with him. Felt like the Ravens were looking for an upgrade this offseason, a backup, especially with, the rumored pursuit of Baker Mayfield, who ended up going to Tampa Bay. But Huntley is someone who I think is a fine NFL quarterback. At this point, he's not really a great one, though. He's not one of the premier options. The thing that maybe separates Huntley from some of the other backup quarterbacks now is his experience. He's had to start a lot of games with Lamar Jackson out. And look, any offense that you take Lamar Jackson out of and insert anybody else, unless, your name Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow or Josh Allen or some of those top guys who can rival Lamar, the offense, the ceiling and the floor is going to just crash. So for Huntley, it was a little bit interesting how his starts, he hasn't really eclipsed 20 points. The deep ball accuracy hasn't really improved. I think Josh Johnson is a veteran. The Ravens really like him. And maybe the Ravens, Jeff said, maybe the Ravens see the cap savings. I think it's right around $2.5 million for Tyler Huntley. Maybe they see it as an opportunity to gain some cap if they don't feel like he's performing. So I don't think it'll go that route. I think Huntley will still be the backup for the Ravens. But, they need someone who can be a solid presence there and put up 20-plus points consistently when Lamar's not on the field. If Lamar's not on the field, hopefully Lamar plays all 17 games this year, and that's not even a possibility. But in the event he is injured, the Ravens need someone to pick up that slack, and hopefully Huntley can do that. A loser in this situation for me, too, is J.K. Dobbins. Now, Dobbins didn't participate in mandatory minicamp. The rumors are that he's holding in, showed up. Now that they were saying, it's just a minor injury. Dobbins declined to comment on the injury, but John Harbaugh visibly disappointed when talking about J.K. Dobbins, and it reminded me of the Ben Mason thing when the Ravens thought they were going to get Mason back after cutting him his rookie year, and then he signed with the Patriots practice squad instead of the Ravens practice squad. And John Harbaugh said, you gotta ask Ben about what he's doing, and he was visibly upset. It was the same thing with J.K. Dobbins, maybe not to that extent, but I think you can tell, when John Harbaugh is upset about something. Feels like the hold-in is what's happening right now. John Harbaugh is very disappointed in that whole thing. And for me, Dobbins is a player who, again, his stock is not at an all-time high right now. He's played in 23 games in 3 NFL seasons. It's shown obvious flashes when he's been on the field, but that's the thing. He hasn't been on the field a lot. So it's going to be a big year for J.K. Dobbins to get on the field. And look, if it was an injury for J.K. Dobbins, I don't like blaming players for injuries because they happen. But some guys, they're just more prone to injuries than others. I'm not calling J.K. Dobbins injury prone. Do not get that twisted. But to me, it just feels like even with an injury, it's unfortunate that if it is an injury and not a hold-in, that it happened so early in training camp or in minicamp, and you got to kind of work through there. It's the same thing with Rashad Bateman. I'm not really calling him a loser in this whole thing. He had the screws taken out, the cortisone shot and whatnot, but I'm not going to call him a loser for that. I think some people have, but I'm not. I think that his status is fine heading into training camp. One more, though, I think James Prochet definitely lost some ground here. Someone who I think his time as a Raven is probably up at the end of the preseason. Someone who I think showed flashes, was one of those training camp stars, but you can't be a training camp star and then not produce during the regular season. Now, Prochet, I think, got the short end of the stick for a couple opportunities when he maybe should have been getting more snaps. But even when he was getting snaps, he just didn't make the impact that he needed to really stick around. Now the Ravens have an extremely deep wide receiver room. I think 5 of those 6 spots are locked up. And, one of those spots are available if you're keeping 6 wide receivers, but you're competing with Tylan Wallace, Laquan Treadwell, Dante Demas, etc. for that 6th spot. And I just think, if anything, Baltimore would keep Tylan Wallace for the 6th spot for special teams, if not a bigger receiver in Laquan Treadwell or Dante Demas. So those are winners and losers from Ravens minicamp. We'll do another one of those as training camp continues and we kind of get into that and as it concludes. But for now, guys definitely gained some ground. Guys definitely lost some ground. But coming up in our final part of the show, we'll be talking about the Ravens' clutch factor a little bit, looking back at their one-score game performance, talking a bit about Justin Tucker, Lamar Jackson, as well as how they can improve on that during the 2023 season. So be sure to stay tuned, plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Taco Tuesday, and thank you so much for being here with us and making us your first listen each and every day. If you're an everydayer, thank you so much for being here every single day. And, if this is your first time tuning in, if you've been here before, thank you as well for showing your support. We are 5 days a week, so you can subscribe both video form and audio form. I really appreciate that. You can tell a friend, tell a family member too. Word of mouth, still definitely a thing here. But let's talk about clutch factor. The Ravens, I think, they've been really clutch in some seasons and not so much in others. Baltimore wasn't necessarily super clutch last year. They lost a lot of one-score games, obviously. Fourth quarters were an issue for them. And look, that's definitely a clutch thing for them, where they were up in fourth quarters. They were in games in fourth quarters, especially early in the year, where they flip-flop those wins, losses. And it didn't give them any type of consistency. Look, the Miami game, I've talked about it a lot here, week 2 for them, where they were up big in the fourth quarter and the defense just utterly collapsed and the Dolphins escaped M&T Bank Stadium with a win that the Ravens should have had. Week 4 against Buffalo, the Bills win a game where the Ravens probably should have won it. Fourth quarter, the Giants, they go to the Meadowlands and they lose that game because of a couple of not so great decisions by Lamar Jackson, by the offense. And then, you can talk about Denver, where they ended up winning that game, but the fateful James Prochet reverse, it just seemed like last year play calling wasn't up to snuff in clutch situations. Execution wasn't up to snuff in clutch situations. And when you look at actually how they performed in those one-score games, they went 6-5 in one-score games, and in games decided by a field goal unless they went 4-3. Didn't end up playing any overtime games, so we're not going to judge them on that. But it just feels like there's so much more room for improvement for them in those clutch situations this year. Where look, they finished as a wild card team, right? They made the playoffs, and that's great. But if you up that to the race for the division came down to the last couple of weeks for the Ravens. Now, it didn't necessarily matter when they played the Bengals in the last week of the season, but I think it was a little bit closer than some people anticipated. Baltimore beat Cincinnati in week 5, and it came down to the final couple of weeks. So if you up that record in one-score games of 6-5 to maybe 7-4, maybe 8-3, and you just squeak out a couple of those wins, we're talking about a much different team, maybe the AFC North champions, depending on what happens. And it's a different story overall. So to me, clutch games are so important, and it just hurts, right? Like, I don't know how people feel about this. My personal opinion is that, I don't know, it almost feels better in a way to get blown out than lose those clutch one-score games. To me, I don't know. Like, obviously, it's better if you lose it close because, you're competitive, you're in the game. If you get blown out, there are a lot of issues you got to fix. But, those clutch games, they just hurt so much if you lose them because you're right there and you almost, when you can see, it's dejecting the players when I think you have that. Now, there are a lot of positive building blocks you can build on those clutch losses to say, we were in the game, we were right there. But, those are moral victories. You want to get the actual victories. And so for the Ravens, they have a couple of things going in their direction with the clutch factor. One of those things is Justin Tucker. Justin Tucker is one of the greatest kickers of all time. And my personal opinion is he is the greatest kicker of all time. And look, I think it speaks to how we all believe in Justin Tucker. When you're talking about people that watch the Ravens and are fans and cover the team and just NFL fans, that when you see Justin Tucker trot out there, for me, it's, going in, book it, 3 points. That's what it is. It speaks a lot, especially when Justin Tucker trots out on the field for, what was it against Jacksonville? 67-yard field goal, and the ball comes off of his leg. And to me, I say, all right, it's going in. Ravens win the game. Now, it came up a little short, but that just speaks to the clutch factor and confidence that so many people have in Justin Tucker. And look, he has obviously earned that over the course of his NFL career. When you have Justin Tucker on your team, game-winning field goals, clutch situations, Justin Tucker, one of the best clutch players of all time. This is a player that I think so many people, talk about, kickers aren't that important. You can just go sign somebody off the street. It's not that though. Like, kickers, special teams can win you and lose you the games around the margins. And The Ravens have done a good job over the course of their franchise history understanding that and getting really good kickers in for the majority of their franchise history, which is a really good thing for them. Now, Lamar Jackson is someone else who, clutch factor wise, I think you want him on the field in the biggest moments there. His decision-making, I think, has improved. 2021 was not a great decision-making year for him. 2022, I thought, was a lot better. Now, it wasn't perfect. I talked about that Giants game that was just, it was tough. The cross body throw across the field to Patrick Ricard of all people, which was an easy interception. The Giants win that game. Was not his finest moment, but I do think the decision-making improved last year. And to me, the clutch situation factor is going to be a little different this year for Lamar, especially with the keys to the offense with Todd Monken, where that trust factor is going to be there. I think, they're going to be getting to the line a little quicker as well. In fact, a lot quicker, hopefully. But that's a big part in this, where it felt like it was Greg Roman's show, where the clutch situations, Greg Roman was making a lot of those calls, if not all of those calls. I think with Lamar Jackson having the guys he now has around him, both, you can talk about receiver-wise, you can talk about coaching-wise, it's going to be a different dynamic this year. So hopefully you can up that into 8-3 in one-score games, 7-4 in one-score games. That's going to be so important for them this year, especially. I'm always going to talk about this leading up to the year, and we'll revisit it after the season ends. But with the AFC being so stacked, we talked about that yesterday. If you haven't checked out yesterday's show, highly recommend that. But with the AFC being so stacked, a win, a loss, a divisional win, a conference win can be so key into getting you into the playoffs, winning your division, getting you seeding implications. Those things are all so important now when you're talking about a conference that we're going to see 5, 6, 7 teams potentially not making the playoffs, where you're saying, wow, that team really didn't make it that year. Like, we're going to look back on this season and say, oh, this quarterback didn't make it, or that quarterback didn't make it. Now, I think the Ravens will make the playoffs. In fact, I think they have to for John Harbaugh's job security. I talked about that yesterday too. But at this point, Baltimore has to pick up those conference wins, those division wins, which are so important. They have 6 straight AFC games to start off the year, and then 3 of their first 5 games are on the road against AFC opponents. So those clutch games might be coming in hot and fast, because you have a lot of those divisional games where they're the Pittsburgh games, the Ravens-Pittsburgh games are always slugfests. Cincinnati, you're going to have to be able to really score on them and hold their offense down. And then Cleveland's a team that, paper champs and everything, but they're a team you got to watch out for as well. So really important for the Ravens to be clutch this year, especially in a conference that is going to show no mercy to them, no mercy to anybody. Is there going to be some teams that, are disappointed with the outcome of the year with not making the playoffs, when in other years they might have. So hopefully Baltimore does not suffer that fate. Hopefully they're in the playoffs, and we'll see how it plays out for them in 2023. But that's all I have for you here today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe to the channel here, like the video as well on YouTube, and also subscribe to us in audio form. More Ravens content coming your way tomorrow, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.